whether or not and to what degree. And we are taping this episode, in case maybe you're watching it later, on March 9th, which is the beginning of Severe Weather Awareness Week. And to talk more about that, I have a special guest today. And if you listen to the pod some, you will definitely recognize her or recognize her voice if you listen. It is Ashley Rehnberg with National Weather Service. Ashley, thank you so much for being here today. I know it's a busy time of year for you guys.
Absolutely. Anytime we can come and talk to you about preparedness and how to get people prepared, especially for severe weather season coming up. Already seeing it starting across portions of the United States. Definitely important for us to be here. So glad to talk to you, Kendra.
Yeah, and I'm, again, glad that we can highlight the importance of preparedness, because I think that this area, a lot of people get the perception that, we're not Tornado Alley, so, we don't need to worry so much about, having a plan in place. But we've certainly seen events that would contradict that statement. We don't get it as much as maybe, say, states like Alabama and Mississippi or Oklahoma, but we certainly have a busy season potentially ahead. Why is it so important that folks have that plan and prepare ahead of time?
We always stress preparing ahead of time, because often by the time the warning is issued, it's kind of too late to really think through all the scenarios, right? You're stressed out because there's maybe a tornado warning or a strong severe thunderstorm headed towards you. You want to be able to think ahead of time to prepare. Think where you're going to have your family gather to be in their safe space so everyone knows where to go. You're not hunting down all your kids, trying to look for them to get them on the lowest level of the floor, in your preferred shelter area away from windows, in an interior room. By preparing and having these things done and thinking of them ahead of time, you're giving yourself time to be able to be a little bit less stressed during an event, especially during a tornado warning. Because when you think about when you get stressed out, I know this happens to me. I'm sure it happens to you, Kendra, but it can be a little hard to think about how to take logical steps, right? So if we do this ahead of time, that really helps take that burden off of us when we actually are in the warning phase.
Yeah, 100%. And that's one thing that I know National Weather Service and us as your media partners are trying to do this week, is just put out as much information as we can to prepare, so that hopefully maybe ahead of the statewide tornado drill that's coming up on Wednesday the 11th. And again, you may be watching this later and that may have already passed. But that's a good time to talk to your family about what you would do, because you're right. You don't want to go into panic mode. That's the last thing you want. You want to just make sure that you're getting to your safe place. And, you think about not only your kids, but how would you handle getting your pets there? That's another thing that I think people scramble on and don't always know what to do. So, they strategically put Severe Weather Awareness Week at this time in March, really because we're starting to head into our big time of year for potential tornadoes and severe weather. Obviously, the summer brings a lot of severe weather. July brings the most wind events for us when it comes to microbursts and summer storms. But when do we typically see the most tornadoes? Because this is something that I think it's hard to quantify, because they really can happen any time of year, and it's usually in that transitions of the seasons, right?
That is correct. So we typically see the springtime, which we're heading towards now, where we typically have more tornadoes, specifically for the Greenville-Spartanburg area, for our area in the upstate, and that covers the Western Carolinas and Northeast Georgia. We typically see the most tornadoes occur in April and May, on average, from our climatology. So that's typically the biggest peak months for tornadoes. Now, Kendra, like you said, it can also happen outside of the main severe times. We often get a secondary severe season during the fall. We have tropical systems that can bring tornadoes as well. So honestly, it really can be taking the time to prepare year round. I mean, we even get tornadoes. We've had tornadoes in December and January here. It just depends on if all the ingredients are there and come together. We have that warm air and unstable air mass. We have a cold front coming through, or a strong storm system approaching out of the west. So as long as the ingredients are there, severe weather can happen year-round, but specifically, mostly it happens here in the spring, and most across the U.S. it mostly happens in the spring as well. But we always have these little secondary severe season in the fall. So it's just always trying to get people to have multiple ways to receive warnings, being prepared like we talked about, take that burden off your future self. Have a no weather radio, make sure it's programmed properly, it's working, it has batteries in it for if the power goes out. Look at social media for alerts and warnings from your favorite TV meteorologist. Enable wireless emergency alerts on your phone. And again, just keeping up to date, watching the weather every day with your local TV station. I know not everyone does that, but us weather geeks really enjoy getting to get any update we can on weather.
Absolutely.
So usually it's more of those watching every day like I did growing up as a kid, people who are infatuated with the weather, but especially during these times we're expecting severe weather, it's really important.
Yeah, we always hope that folks are watching the news leading up to some of these events, but we're realistic. I know that people are not as regular news watchers as we have been in the past, but I think you guys do such a beautiful job of this too, and it's something that we work to do as well, as getting that information on all platforms that we can. Social media, any kind of, on your website, just any way that people can digest that info, because sometimes I feel like seeing it as you're scrolling on your Facebook is going to hit a lot more people than making sure that they tune in specifically for our 10 p.m. newscasts or any other time. And I know that, you mentioned April being the most common month for this kind of activity. I mentioned to you that I wanted to talk a little bit about some of our most memorable severe events, and most of mine, when it comes to tornadoes, are in the month of April, so it makes a whole lot of sense. I could never forget the Seneca tornado, that one coming through at the middle of the night. My parents lived there, so it was very scary. Just I was worried about all of our community, but particularly about my family covering that. I can recall many Easter weekends that we've had severe weather and sometimes even tornado warnings. And my daughter's birthday is April 11th, and there have been tornado warnings on her birthday 4 times since she's turning 13 this April 11th. So just want to give you all a heads up at National Weather Service. Watch out for that April 11th day, because it seems to be a magnet for severe weather.
Yeah, my birthday is at the end of April, Kendra, so I relate to her so much. I remember studying for finals and also simultaneously watching big tornadoes cross the street from the Weather Center in Norman, Oklahoma. Yeah. So I was always very busy. So yeah, April babies unfortunately kind of have to deal with that severe threat. That could, change your plans with birthdays and stuff.
Oh, so, I can imagine. And I don't know if you have any memorable events from your birthday, or if there's any particular that just sticks out to you from covering here at National Weather Service in Greenville or any of your other places where you've lived. I think there's certain ones that just kind of mark us, don't they?
Yeah, so I actually was not here for the Seneca one. I had come just shortly after that and just gone into the Weather Service. And so the main event that I really think of is Tropical Storm Fred in August of 2021. And I know that's kind of an odd event to pick, a tropical system, but we had a lot of tornado warnings that day, especially across the upstate.
I don't think I can remember. I don't remember. Sorry to interrupt you. I just want to say, I don't know if I remember a day when we've had more. That was, obviously the flooding in the mountains and the landslides was horrible with Fred. That was the flip side. But the number of tornado warnings, I don't know if I've been on the air and covered like 4 simultaneous warnings any other time, but I'm pretty sure we did with Fred.
Yeah, I remember, I'm getting chills just thinking about it, because I hadn't even been in the Weather Service for a year. So I was in the process of getting radar certified. I wasn't yet. So I myself was not on radar. And we had so many people trying to log into workstations here that we didn't have enough. So we were trying to get people to log off and be done for the day and trying to transition with that. I was helping communicate in Slack, or the old NWS chat, I guess, back then. And just updating, hey, we're issuing a warning on this, and it got so busy that it was kind of hard to keep up with at the time. But I just remember just kind of sitting there and thinking, wow, this is a huge event. And I just remember I got off work that day and I went to the gym, and I had kept getting all these warnings on my phone, and was trying to make sure I had enough time to get to the gym and back, and thought, well, it'd be better and safer for me to be at, Planet
Right.
Fitness than it would be for me to be in my apartment on the third story. So, I was thinking, I'll just go there and hang out till everything calms down. But that event for sure definitely was kind of burned into my mind just because I was so new. It was my first time really seeing the office in action with really active weather. And it wasn't only tornadoes, like you mentioned, we had flooding and landslides occurring simultaneously in the mountains as well. So it was a multi-hazard event. So that one really sticks out to me personally.
Yeah, and that's got to be a lot on all of the forecasters, the warning coordination going on, because you have all of these different storms you're watching, and then you're also watching flash flood emergencies. I think there were a couple of those that day. When it comes to those warnings, I want to explain to viewers a little bit that we're not the ones that issue those. We help to disseminate that information to the public. We get on the air and let you know, but Ashley and everyone else at National Weather Service, those are the ones that are watching the radar and pinpoint warning issuance. Just specifically, because we could go into lots of depth on that, but just specifically for tornado warnings, what all goes into that process? Because I know you need to see, a certain level of rotation. You want to see it at different levels in the atmosphere. And obviously, you don't have to have a tornado spotted, because that's very rare here that we actually see anything spotted before you warn. But you're warning because there's high confidence based on what you've seen on radar with the Doppler radar that we have that tight rotation happening with a storm.
Yeah, and the reason most of the time we don't get reports is all the trees and the terrain out here. It's hard to see them coming from a distance, say, compared to Oklahoma, where it's flat and there's hardly any trees. You can kind of see it coming from miles away, right? Especially depending on how big it is. And luckily, the ones that we have here usually are not that big, thankfully. They're a little bit smaller, but they still can cause damage. And so with our ingredients and our terrain being so different out here in the Carolinas, compared to, say, the Southern Plains like Texas and Oklahoma, kind of where I grew up, the radar signatures aren't usually as obvious, for lack of a better word, compared to what we see in Texas and Oklahoma, for example. So we're really looking at the lowest level of the atmosphere. We're looking for this very, sometimes very weak, sometimes it can be a strong signature for low-level rotation. It's where we're seeing that rotation start in the atmosphere. And basically, if it's strong enough, and assuming we have all the ingredients in place that we're expecting to be capable of producing tornadoes, that is when we would issue the tornado warning.
Right. And, you make a great point that we just don't get those classic, very rarely we get those classic supercell structures. But otherwise, that's a big challenge for me on air sometimes, is we'll have, embedded rotations in a line, a QLCS will move through, which just basically means kind of we don't have a ton of storm energy. We've got a lot of shear in the atmosphere. So that's probably the most common kind of severe weather around here. So you just often don't get something where you can point to a viewer and say, see where this little thing's sticking out? That's where we have, we often have to look at multiple things, trying to show the storm relative velocity, everything else. So that's why, again, that can be a really tricky thing. And I wanted to ask you about issuing, because I'm sure that there are a lot of times, and I know this because of being on chat with you guys. You're such great communicators. You'll be watching a storm, and it's so close. You'll say, okay, we've got this amount of rotation, but we're just not seeing, something else that would tell us that this is going to turn into a tornado. So I'm really impressed with all the nuanced information you look at, and the fact that the thoughtfulness that goes into issuing those, because obviously once you do, it really does, they don't get issued much around here. So when they do, it really does cause people to take action, and sometimes, hopefully not, but panic. So your decision making is really important, and we really appreciate you on that, because again, it's not easy with some of those storms.
Yeah, we appreciate y'all communicating it as well. We're issuing the warning, but you guys are wall to wall having to talk for sometimes 45 minutes about the storm. I remember what that was like. It was difficult. I'd get 3 minutes in and be like, okay, now what?
Right.
So I know
like you're repeating a lot.
Yeah, I know that the communication on our end is really helpful. So we try really hard, and of course, it depends on how busy we are. But you had mentioned an interesting point. We don't often see those big hook echoes out here. That's more out in the plains. So we're not seeing a more obvious signature like that per se. We're looking more at like line breaks, and how to explain that is very difficult, and picking them out. It's a very tiny detail, and if you're not watching very closely, which we always are, you can miss it. And they spin up so quickly, like Kendra was talking about those QLCS systems. It's basically like this little linear line of storms coming towards you. And those can spin up tornadoes very quickly, especially in the leading edge. And depending where the most unstable part of the line is, and it can be very quick. They can sometimes drop down and pick up by the time we're getting the warning out, So we always want to tell people with those type of storms, and just be prepared if we're expecting that tornado threat with those systems to seek shelter, even if a severe thunderstorm warning is issued. Sometimes we'll have a tag on there that says tornado possible on a severe thunderstorm, just because we're expecting for there to be a favorable environment, and it may just spin up so quickly and be done so quickly. They spin up quickly, they fall apart quickly. So just being able to act quickly enough, and that's why you want to go back to being prepared ahead of time, so that way you're not scrambling making these decisions in the middle of that warning or in the middle of the tornado.
Yeah, that's a great way to come full circle to what we started with, because these things can happen, in the blink of an eye, and sometimes you don't have the lead time that we'd like to give people, just because of the nature of some of these quick circulations that happen in lines. So you just want to take this week, talk to your family, your coworkers, wherever you spend a lot of time, so that you know where you're going to go. I want to wrap this up with you by talking about some myths, because there are a lot of them when it comes to severe weather. Things that kind of, hopefully by now, most of it has been dispelled, but I think back in the 80s and 90s, a lot of these things were thought of as being true. So let me know what are some of your biggest myths or some pet peeves out there that you hear people saying.
I think the main one is that tornadoes don't happen in the mountains, over bodies of water, or in major cities. They've happened in all of those. We have tornadoes in the mountains. They're not as often or as frequent as east of the mountains, but they still can happen. And they can cross bodies of water. Sometimes they can survive, depending if it's just a real small body of water. Of course, they'll just run right over it, go right back on the land. But sometimes, like on the coast, we'll see a really strong tornado kind of transition out in the ocean or on a big lake, and it'll transition more towards a water spout. And then if it goes back on the land, it transitions back to a tornado. So it is possible. I grew up near Dallas, Texas. We had tornadoes all the time in downtown Dallas. I remember watching coverage of that. So it is possible, and it has happened. Another one, I think this one is mostly old and people don't do this anymore, but just in case, I forgot about this one until I was digging some up. A lot of people think opening the windows when there's a tornado warning or a severe thunderstorm will help equalize the pressure in your house. Right. It will not. You're going to waste time opening these windows versus taking shelter, right?
Oh, Ashley, I'm glad. Sorry, we have like a slight delay. I don't want to cut you off, but I'm just so glad you brought that up, because I go to school visits, and I swear to you, every other visit, I get a question of, should I open up my windows in my house when a tornado is coming? So it is still out there. That is still very much a myth that is circulating, that maybe some parents heard when they were kids and have carried on. But I'm glad we're dispelling that one, because that just brings on more potential for debris to get into your house or any other issues.
Exactly. Yeah, and then the windows, nothing's going to stop. If you have large hail or a strong enough tornado coming through, opening the window is really not going to do much anyways. No. But like you said, you can have debris now flying into your house. That's going to put you at more risk, and then it delays the taking of action of shelter. Yeah. So you definitely just take the time, just give yourself some extra time, and don't worry about doing that. Tornadoes never strike the same area twice. We always hear this about lightning as well. That's also not true. It can strike the same area twice. Seneca seems to be a hot spot in our area, unfortunately. Every time I get told about these big severe events, it's always Seneca, and I'm like, oh, okay, noted about that. So we're always watching that area real closely. There's just something about that area. It's like, Moore in Oklahoma. There's something about Moore in Oklahoma that just, seems to draw more attention for tornadoes for some reason, which is really interesting. And then the last one that I could think of, and if you have more, please add them. Never, ever shelter under a bridge or under an overpass during a hailstorm or during a tornado. You're going to back up traffic, and everyone else is going to be stuck, and they're not going to be able to get out of the way. And two, if you're underneath the overpass and there's a tornado, what's going to happen is it's actually going to funnel those winds. So you're going to actually get stronger winds that could cause more issues for you or throw debris at you or the car. So we always recommend, trying to pull off if you have time to a sturdy structure. And as an absolute last resort, getting into a ditch, covering your head, especially with weaker tornadoes. like we normally see out here, but that would be like a last resort option. Hopefully you're aware of what's going on that day, taking the necessary precautions and knowing not to be on that road during that time, but we know life doesn't always work like that. So it's just always better to be prepared and just ask yourself about all these different scenarios. What if I'm at work? What if my kids are at school? What if I'm at home? What if I'm out driving? Just think to yourself, what can I do to keep myself safe? And sometimes we just have to make really hard decisions within a split second that could be life-saving. So it's just glad that you asked me to come talk because this is really important.
Absolutely. And if you have that guide in your mind, just a little, like even just a little checklist of things where say, okay, if I'm in my car, this is what I'm supposed to, just you don't have to go into that panic mode. And you did mention something that got me to another myth that sometimes I'll hear is that your vehicle is safe in a tornado, and it's not. If you see a tornado coming, this sounds so crazy to abandon it and get into like a ditch, but you're safer outside of your car and in a low-lying ditch, or if you can obviously get to shelter, much safer. But I think people get confused about that because in lightning, your car's okay, but if there's a tornado, that's when you need to get to a shelter as quickly as you can or just abandon it altogether.
Yeah, I always have to explain that difference to kids with school talks. Like, well, I can stay in the car for lightning, but not a tornado. And I always say like, oh, think of like you're playing with a toy car. If you have this really strong tornado coming through or just strong winds even, and it comes through, it's just going to toss it around like a toy car. It's going to launch you maybe feet, yards, miles, depending on how strong it is. Hopefully not like out here, but like in Oklahoma, that's a huge deal, right? You're just unsafe when you get to those bigger tornadoes, especially being in a car. So that is a good point.
Awesome. Well, I don't know how we talk for 20 minutes and it just goes like that. So Ashley, you're the best. Thank you so much for joining us and for helping to keep the upstate mountains in Northeast Georgia safe. I'm sure it'll be somewhat busy. We'll see kind of how the season pans out when it comes to, I know we need the rain. We just don't need the severe weather. So this is your busy time. And again, thank you for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome. All right. Well, we will see you soon. I'm sure we'll be dispelling more myths and talking about forecast challenges along the way. And if you have an idea for a podcast, be sure to reach out to us. You can email us at kendra.kent@foxcarolina.com. Let us know if there's a topic you want us to hit. But since it's Severe Weather Awareness Week, wanted to get with the best so we could talk about how to prepare. All right, see you guys later.